Leyla, the hopeful young bride from Istanbul, and Robert Harris, the 67-year-old American widower, appeared to be an unlikely couple. But behind their whirlwind marriage was a deadly secret, one that would spiral into obsession, betrayal, and murder. Leyla grew up in a small apartment in Istanbul, surrounded by the sounds of street vendors, crowded markets, and the constant hum of the city. She was bright, ambitious, and tired of the narrow expectations placed on her as a young woman in her community. She often stayed up late at night, scrolling through social media, imagining a life far from the struggles she saw around her. One evening, she received a friend request from Robert Harris, a man nearly 3 times her age, living in Florida. His profile showed photos of boats, big houses, and a life of comfort. At first, she thought it was strange that someone his age was reaching out, but his messages were filled with charm and attention she had never received before. He complimented her, told her she was special, and painted pictures of a new life across the ocean. Weeks passed, and their conversations grew more intense. Robert claimed he was lonely after losing his wife, and that he wanted a fresh start. He sent Leyla money for clothes and gifts, saying he wanted her to feel cared for. Her friends warned her to be careful, but Leyla felt like fate had chosen her for something bigger. The idea of living in America pulled her in more than Robert's affection, though she convinced herself it was love. Her parents were uneasy, whispering about the difference in age, but Robert promised stability, safety, and the chance for Leyla to live her dreams. When Robert flew to Istanbul, he showered her family with polite smiles and expensive presents. The marriage happened quickly, without much celebration. As Leyla signed her name on the papers, she believed she was stepping into a bright future. She had no idea she was walking straight into danger. The wedding was rushed, almost as if Robert was afraid that waiting too long might cause Leyla to change her mind. Within weeks of meeting her in person, he arranged for the ceremony to take place in a quiet office, far from the celebrations Leyla had once imagined for herself. There were no flowers, no music, no gathering of friends. Just papers, signatures, and a promise that her life was about to change forever. Leyla smiled for photographs, but inside she felt uneasy. Robert's confidence and insistence left her with little room to question anything. She told herself it was normal for such things to move quickly when love was real. Soon after the marriage, Robert began preparing her paperwork for the U.S. spousal visa. He reassured her that everything was under control, but she noticed how he spoke about the process as if it were more of a transaction than a union of 2 lives. When her visa was approved, Leyla's family gathered at the airport to say goodbye. Their faces were filled with mixed emotions, sadness, worry, and a glimmer of hope that maybe she would find happiness abroad. When Leyla arrived in Florida, her dream of America was not what she expected. Instead of the bustling city life she had imagined, she found herself in Robert's suburban home, surrounded by quiet streets and neighbors who stared at her with curiosity. She felt out of place, like an ornament in someone else's life. At first, Robert was attentive, making sure she had everything she needed. Yet beneath his generosity was a strange coldness, an invisible wall that separated them. The excitement of travel and new beginnings quickly faded, replaced by a creeping sense of isolation that made her question what she had really agreed to. Life in Florida quickly lost its shine for Leyla. The quiet suburban streets felt suffocating compared to the energy of Istanbul. Robert insisted she stay home most of the time, telling her that America was dangerous and she should not go out alone. At first, she believed he was simply being protective, but soon it became clear he wanted complete control. He kept her passport locked away, saying it was for safekeeping. He demanded access to her phone and checked her messages daily. Even the money he gave her was limited, with every dollar accounted for. Neighbors noticed how rarely Leyla was seen outside. When she did appear, it was always with Robert beside her, watching closely. Behind closed doors, the atmosphere grew darker. Robert criticized her cooking, her accent, even the way she dressed. He reminded her constantly that without him, she would lose her immigration status and be sent back home in shame. The words were sharp, leaving Leyla feeling powerless. What she didn't know was that Robert had a history of failed relationships. Police records, buried in old files, showed restraining orders from women who had once accused him of threats and violence. None of this was known to Leyla, who believed she had simply married a difficult but lonely man. She tried to stay hopeful, telling herself that things would improve once she adjusted. She decorated the house with little touches from her culture, cooking meals that reminded her of home. Yet nothing softened Robert's temper. Every attempt at independence was met with anger. The man who had once promised her a new life now treated her as property. Alone in a foreign country, Leyla began to realize she was trapped in a cage she had unknowingly walked into. Melissa, Robert's adult daughter, had never trusted Leyla from the start. To her, the marriage was nothing more than a scam, a young foreign woman using her aging father to gain entry into the United States. From the moment Leyla arrived, Melissa made it clear she considered her an intruder. She visited often, walking through the house as if it still belonged to her, and treated Leyla with thinly veiled hostility. She accused her of being manipulative, of marrying for papers, and of planning to abandon Robert once she secured permanent residency. Each word cut into Leyla, but the real damage was how these accusations fueled Robert's suspicions. Melissa began collecting small pieces of what she believed was evidence. She photographed Leyla talking to neighbors, snooped through her belongings when Robert wasn't looking, and even searched her social media accounts. She printed out screenshots, showing them to Robert as proof that Leyla was untrustworthy. Instead of easing his doubts, Melissa planted seeds of paranoia that quickly grew out of control. Robert, already insecure about his age and the difference between them, began to view every action Leyla took as a potential betrayal. A phone call to a friend in Turkey became suspicious. A walk to the nearby grocery store became a sign of disobedience. He no longer saw her as a partner, but as a threat. Leyla, caught between Robert's control and Melissa's accusations, felt increasingly cornered. She longed for support, but instead she was treated as an enemy in her own home. The tension in the house grew heavier with each passing day, and what began as quiet hostility evolved into open conflict. Melissa's presence did not just add pressure. It lit the match that turned Robert's fears into dangerous obsession. Leyla knew she could not continue living under Robert's tightening grip. Every day felt like a test of obedience, every word monitored, every step shadowed. She began searching for ways to protect herself without alerting him. Quietly, late at night when Robert slept, she used his computer to look up immigration resources. That was how she discovered she might be able to apply for the removal of conditions on her green card without his help if she could prove abuse or coercion. It was a small light in a dark tunnel, and she clung to it. Determined but cautious, Leyla contacted an immigration lawyer through a discreet email account she created. She explained her situation in careful words, terrified that Robert might discover what she was doing. The lawyer assured her she had options and encouraged her to keep records of Robert's controlling behavior. For the first time since arriving in America, Leyla felt she had a chance at freedom. During this time, she also befriended Ayhan, a Turkish immigrant she met at a small grocery store that sold familiar foods from home. Ayhan had lived in the U.S. for years and immediately recognized the fear behind Leyla's polite smile. He warned her that he had seen women in similar situations, trapped by controlling husbands who used immigration as a weapon. Some managed to escape, but others ended in tragedy. His words stayed with her, confirming the dangers she already sensed. Despite the risks, Leyla began hiding documents, keeping copies of her identification, and secretly saving money whenever she could. Each step toward independence was taken in silence, hidden beneath the surface of her daily life. She knew Robert would never forgive her if he discovered the truth, but she also knew staying silent meant losing herself completely. Robert's behavior became more erratic as weeks passed, and the household felt like it was constantly on edge. He no longer trusted Leyla with even the smallest freedoms. If she left the house, he followed. If she used the phone, he demanded to know whom she had called. He searched through her bags at night, convinced she was hiding something. The obsession was consuming him, and Melissa only added fuel to the fire. She whispered warnings that Leyla was planning to leave, that she would take everything once her immigration papers were finalized. Robert's insecurities turned into constant surveillance. He installed small cameras around the house under the guise of security, but their real purpose was to monitor her movements. He checked the footage daily, looking for proof that she was deceiving him. Every innocent action became suspicious in his eyes. When Leyla spoke in Turkish on the phone with her family, he accused her of plotting. When she bought small items at the store, he demanded receipts, believing she was hiding money. The breaking point came when Robert discovered a folder hidden at the back of a drawer. Inside were printed emails between Leyla and the immigration lawyer, along with notes she had written to herself about leaving. To Robert, this was undeniable proof of betrayal. He felt humiliated, convinced that his greatest fear had been confirmed. In reality, Leyla had not yet acted on her plans, but in Robert's mind, she had already abandoned him. From that moment on, the house turned into a battleground. He confronted her with icy anger, no longer pretending to be the caring husband he once portrayed. The kindness that had drawn her in was gone, replaced by suspicion and quiet rage. Leyla knew she was running out of time. The storm rolled in that evening with heavy rain and flashes of lightning. But inside the Harris home, the atmosphere was far darker than the weather outside. Neighbors later reported hearing loud thuds and what sounded like furniture being overturned, though at the time they dismissed it as the storm. Robert had reached his breaking point. Fueled by anger, humiliation, and the belief that Leyla had been deceiving him all along, he snapped. His rage spilled out in a violent attack that ended with Leyla lying lifeless on the living room floor. Melissa was home during the chaos, but she later insisted she heard nothing over the storm. Some suspected she knew exactly what had happened and chose silence, unwilling to intervene or report her father. Hours passed before Robert acted. Instead of panic, he moved with a chilling calmness, dragging Leyla's body into the garage and wrapping it in sheets. He loaded her into his truck during the dead of night, the rain masking his movements. By the time morning arrived, Robert had already buried her in a shallow grave behind a wooded area near his property, covering the ground with branches and leaves to hide the disturbed soil. To anyone passing by, nothing seemed unusual. Later that day, he placed a call to police, his voice steady as he reported Leyla missing. He claimed she had left the house during the storm and never returned. He even showed officers her belongings still inside the home, as if to prove his innocence. His demeanor was convincing, but something about his calmness unsettled investigators. For the moment, however, there was no evidence tying him to anything sinister. Leyla's disappearance was recorded as a mystery, but the truth was already buried beneath the earth. The search for Leyla began almost immediately after Robert's report, but investigators were uneasy from the start. His account of her disappearance lacked detail, and his calm demeanor seemed unnatural for a husband whose wife had supposedly vanished during a violent storm. Detectives canvassed the neighborhood, asking if anyone had seen Leyla leave the house that night. Several neighbors recalled hearing loud crashes before the storm drowned out the sounds, but none had seen her outside. Their statements only deepened suspicions. 2 days later, the investigation took a grim turn. A search team combing the wooded area behind Robert's property discovered freshly disturbed soil. Beneath it lay a shallow grave. Wrapped in bedsheets was Leyla's body, her face bruised and marked by blunt force trauma. The discovery transformed the case from a missing person into a homicide investigation. The community was horrified, though many admitted they had long suspected something was wrong inside that house. Forensic experts worked quickly, analyzing fibers, soil, and injuries. The evidence painted a clear picture. Leyla had died inside the home before being moved. Detectives returned to question Robert, but he stuck to his story, claiming he had no idea how she ended up there. His attempts at denial began to crumble under the weight of the facts. The shallow grave was only steps away from his property, a careless choice that revealed desperation rather than planning. Investigators suspected he believed the storm would erase traces of his crime, but instead, it provided the perfect contrast, the chaos outside highlighting the cold, deliberate actions inside his home. With Leyla's body found, suspicion hardened into certainty. What had once been a story of love and opportunity had now become the chilling account of a life cut short by betrayal and rage. As investigators dug deeper into Robert's life, his carefully crafted image of a grieving husband unraveled. Financial records revealed he had quietly taken out a life insurance policy on Leyla only months after their marriage. The policy listed him as the sole beneficiary, a detail that shifted his motive from suspicion to greed. Detectives began to suspect that Robert had never intended to build a future with Leyla at all, but rather to use her for financial gain while maintaining control over every aspect of her existence. The search of his home uncovered more disturbing evidence. In a locked drawer, officers found Melissa's printed screenshots of Leyla's social media activity, along with notes written in Melissa's handwriting that accused Leyla of planning to flee. It appeared Melissa had been documenting Leyla's actions to reinforce Robert's paranoia. Neighbors later testified that on the night of Leyla's disappearance, Melissa had been seen helping Robert carry large bags into the garage, contradicting her earlier claims of ignorance. Confronted with this evidence, Melissa insisted she was only trying to protect her father, claiming she had no knowledge of what was inside the bags. Investigators, however, believed her silence and actions made her complicit. The case transformed into more than just a story of a controlling husband. It became a portrait of a toxic alliance between father and daughter. The prosecution built a timeline showing how Robert's obsession, combined with Melissa's hostility, created a deadly environment. Financial gain, jealousy, and fear of exposure collided into a motive powerful enough to end Leyla's life. What had once seemed like a marriage of opportunity now looked like a carefully set trap. The hidden documents and witness statements left little doubt that this was not an impulsive act of rage alone. It was part of a calculated cover-up. The courtroom was filled with tension as Robert Harris faced trial for the murder of his young wife. Prosecutors laid out the case piece by piece, showing the jury how a marriage built on promises of love had been nothing more than a trap. They presented the life insurance policy, the history of Robert's controlling behavior, and the chilling discovery of Leyla's body buried only steps from his property. Each detail painted a picture of a man driven by greed, obsession, and fear of losing control. Melissa was called to the stand, and her testimony became one of the most dramatic moments of the trial. She tried to distance herself from her father, claiming she had never known about his plans. But under cross-examination, her lies began to unravel. The evidence of her helping him move bags, combined with her written notes about Leyla, convinced the jury she had played a role in covering up the crime. While she had not struck the fatal blow, her actions tied her to the aftermath in ways she could not escape. The defense tried to argue that Robert acted in a moment of passion, but the jury saw through the narrative. The shallow grave, the insurance documents, and his history of abuse all told a story too consistent to ignore. After weeks of testimony, the verdict was delivered. Robert Harris was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Melissa faced a lesser sentence for being an accessory after the fact, but her reputation and freedom were destroyed. For Leyla's family in Istanbul, the outcome brought a measure of justice, but no comfort. Their daughter's dream of a better life had ended in tragedy, a reminder of how promises of love can mask the darkest of intentions.